The box was sitting on my kitchen counter when I got home that Tuesday evening. I almost walked past it. I'd had a long day, the kind that leaves your shoulders somewhere around your knees. And all I wanted was a glass of water and about 10 hours of not thinking. But something made me stop. It was a small white box, the kind jewelry comes in, tied with a pale blue ribbon. No card, just my name written in my aunt's handwriting on the outside. I stood there for a moment, still in my coat, and just looked at it. My aunt had passed 3 weeks earlier. She was 71, sharp until the very end. And she was the only person in my family who ever looked at me the way you look at someone you're genuinely proud of. Not proud because they did what you expected, proud because they surprised you. I hadn't opened anything of hers yet. I wasn't ready, but something about the way my name looked in her handwriting made me reach for it anyway. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a small charm compass. Underneath it, folded into a tiny square, was a note in her handwriting. It said, "You always knew which way was north. Don't let them spin you around." I sat down on the floor right there in my kitchen, still in my coat, and I didn't move for a long time. That was 3 weeks before my cousin's wedding. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I've been running my own financial consulting firm for 4 years, and before that, I spent 6 years working for one of the top investment firms in Atlanta. I own a 2-bedroom condo in Midtown. I drive a car I paid for in full, and I have a savings account that would make most people's eyes water. I don't say any of this to brag. I say it because it matters for what happened next, and because my family had absolutely no idea. That's the part people find hardest to believe. But my family, my mother's side, specifically had spent so long deciding who I was that they stopped paying attention to who I'd actually become. In their version of me, I was still the quiet one, the one who didn't go to the right school, didn't marry the right person, didn't move to the right city. I went to a state school on a full academic scholarship when my cousin, my aunt's daughter, the one getting married, went to Vanderbilt on her parents' money. I moved to Atlanta when everyone else stayed in our hometown in South Carolina. I built something quietly, by myself, without asking anyone for approval or money or a single thing. But in my family, if you don't announce yourself constantly, you don't exist. My cousin's name is Diane. She's 34, 3 years older than me, and she has spent most of her adult life being the family's golden child. She's beautiful. She married a man named Marcus whose family has old money, and the wedding was being held at his family's estate outside of Charleston, a property with actual horses and a rose garden, and a dock on a private lake. It was the kind of wedding that gets featured in magazines. Diane had been planning it for 2 years. I was not in the wedding party. This wasn't a surprise. I hadn't been close to Diane since we were teenagers, and even then, close is a generous word. We were polite to each other at holidays. We didn't call. The only person who had kept me connected to that side of the family was my Aunt Diane's mother, who had passed in November and whose absence I felt every single day. The invitation came in January. It was addressed to me alone, no plus one, and it was the standard outer circle invitation. Not the rehearsal dinner, not the family brunch, just the ceremony and reception, which was fine. I wasn't expecting more. I RSVP'd yes because my aunt had loved Diane, whatever their complications, and I thought showing up was the right thing to do, a small way of honoring her. What I did not expect was the phone call I got 2 weeks before the wedding. It was my mother. She opened with small talk, which is always a warning sign, and then worked her way around to the point the way she does, circling it, softening it, building a little cushion of words so the thing she actually wants to say lands gently. What she eventually said was that Diane had called her, and Diane had mentioned, not a big deal, that the wedding was going to be quite large, quite formal, and that some of the seats were being restructured, and that my invitation might have been sent prematurely. I asked her to say that again. My mother repeated it, more slowly, with more cushioning. The short version was, Diane wasn't sure there was room for me. I didn't say much. I asked if my invitation had been rescinded. My mother said she wouldn't use that word. I said I would, and that if Diane wanted to uninvite me, Diane could call me herself. My mother got quiet. The call ended shortly after. Diane did not call. The invitation was never formally taken back. So 2 weeks later, on a Saturday in April, I got in my car and I drove to Charleston. I want to be clear about how I looked that day, because it matters. I wasn't dressed to impress. I wasn't dressed to send a message. I wore a midi dress in pale sage green, simple, elegant, The kind of thing my aunt would have called understated class. Low heels, my hair down, the silver bracelet with the compass charm on my wrist. I looked like someone who had somewhere to be and knew it. The estate was 40 minutes outside of the city, down a road lined with Spanish moss and old oaks. When I turned in through the front gate, a young man in a white shirt asked my name, checked a list, and paused. He checked again. Then he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you pull over to the side just for a moment?" I pulled over. I waited. About 4 minutes later, a woman in a headset came to my window. She introduced herself as the wedding coordinator. She was polite and professional, and clearly uncomfortable. She told me that there appeared to be a discrepancy with my seating, and asked if I would mind waiting in the guest cottage while she sorted it out. The guest cottage was a small, pretty building near the parking area. There was sweet tea and a plate of cheese and crackers inside, which I appreciated. I sat down, I checked my email, and I waited. 22 minutes later, the coordinator returned and told me that there had indeed been a mix-up and that my seat was confirmed. She walked me to the ceremony garden herself, apologizing twice more along the way. I found my seat outer row, near the back, which was fine. The garden was genuinely beautiful. Long rows of white chairs, a canopy of wisteria over the altar, late afternoon light coming through the trees in long gold strips. Whatever else I thought about this wedding, the setting was breathtaking. I was reading the program when I heard her. "Oh my gosh. Claire, you actually came." I looked up. Diane's younger sister, my other cousin. Bethany was standing at the end of my row in a lilac bridesmaid dress, holding a small bouquet, looking at me with an expression I can only describe as entertained. Not surprised. Entertained. Like she'd been looking forward to this. I said yes. I actually came. She laughed a small, private laugh, and said something under her breath that I almost missed. What she said was, "Diane is going to love this." Then she walked away. 15 minutes later, Diane walked past on her way to the staging area. She didn't see me at first. When she did, she stopped. For a moment, she just looked at me, and I looked back. Then she smiled the kind of smile that isn't warm, and came over. She said she was surprised I made the drive. I said it wasn't far. She looked at my dress, at my bracelet, at my low heels, and the smile shifted in a way I recognized. It was the same shift I'd seen my whole life on certain faces. The assessment, the conclusion, the decision about what category you belonged in. She said, "You look so natural, very you." Then she said she had to go get ready, touched my shoulder once, and left. Very you. I turned back to my program. I watched the ceremony from my outer row seat, and it was lovely in the way expensive weddings are lovely choreographed and gleaming and slightly unreal. Marcus cried when Diane came down the aisle. That part felt genuine. The vows were personal and warm. I was glad for them, whatever my feelings about the rest of it. The reception was held in a tent on the lawn, strung with lights and filled with round tables draped in white. I found my table, table 14, near the side, with people I didn't recognize. We introduced ourselves. A retired couple from Marcus's parents' church. A colleague of Marcus's from work. A woman named Patricia who was a childhood friend of Diane's mother-in-law. We had a perfectly pleasant conversation about Charleston real estate and the best spots for shrimp and grits in the city. The dinner was served. The toasts were made. I clapped in the right places. At one point, Bethany drifted by our table with a glass of champagne and a familiar smile, and said, loudly enough for the table to hear, "You doing okay all the way out here? I hope they at least gave you a real chair." Patricia looked at me. I said the chair was excellent, and that the shrimp was better. Bethany's smile flickered and she moved on. I didn't see Diane again until she was making her rounds the new wife circuit, table by table, thanking guests, posing for photos. When she reached table 14, she was warm and gracious, the performance polished. She thanked everyone by name where she could. When she got to me, she squeezed my hand and said it meant so much that I had made the time. The way she said made the time made it sound like a small mercy I had extended downward. I smiled. I said, of course. I meant it. It was during the second round of dancing that a man appeared at the edge of our table and asked if I was Claire. He was maybe 50, silver-haired, in a very good suit. I said yes. He said his name was Robert, and that he was Marcus's father, and that he wondered if I would mind stepping away from the table for a few minutes to speak with someone. I followed him across the tent, past the dance floor, to a quieter corner near the bar where a small cluster of people were talking. One of them was a man I recognized immediately, though I'd never met him in person, Gerald Whitmore. He ran one of the largest private equity operations in the Southeast. I had spent 3 years analyzing his firm's portfolio structures as part of my own research. I had cited his methodology in 2 of my own client strategy documents. Robert introduced me to Gerald. Gerald shook my hand and said, "So you're the Claire Hendricks. Marcus told me you'd be here. I've been hoping we'd end up in the same room." I said I hadn't realized Marcus knew my work. Robert smiled and said Marcus had done his research before the wedding, made sure he knew everyone on the guest list. He said Marcus had mentioned me specifically at the rehearsal dinner the night before. Told Gerald I was the consultant who'd helped restructure the Meridian Group's investment ladder last year. That deal had been in the financial press. Gerald had read about it. Gerald said he'd been looking for someone to bring in on a project for the second quarter. He asked if I was taking new clients. We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of it, he had my card and I had his, and we had a call scheduled for the following Thursday. That call turned into a 3-year consulting contract, the largest single contract I have ever signed. I went back to table 14. Patricia asked if I knew those men. I said one was the father of the groom and one was a client, and I smiled, and she said something kind about it being a small world. Later, when the dancing had thinned and the lights had warmed and people were beginning to drift toward the parking area, I saw Diane standing near the edge of the tent with Bethany. They were watching me. I don't know how long they'd been watching. I picked up my clutch, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the exit. As I passed them, Diane said my name. I stopped. She asked how I knew Gerald Whitmore. I said we had mutual professional interests. She looked at me for a moment, really looked, maybe for the first time all evening, and something moved across her face that I hadn't seen there before. Not quite recognition. Something more uncomfortable than that. I told her the wedding was beautiful. I told her I was glad I came. Both of those things were true. I hugged her once, briefly, and walked out through the rose garden to the parking lot, past the old oaks and the Spanish moss, to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before turning the key. The night was warm and very still. I could hear music faintly from the tent, and somewhere farther off, water moving on the lake. I thought about my aunt, about the note she'd left me, about the compass charm on my bracelet, which I turned once around my wrist before starting the engine. She had been the only one who ever asked me real questions. Not what are you doing, but what are you building? Not when are you getting married, but what do you love about the work? She had understood, without me ever having to explain it, that silence is not the same as absence, that choosing not to announce yourself is not the same as having nothing to announce. On the drive back to Atlanta, I thought about what it costs to spend your life performing your worth for people who have already decided not to see it. And I thought about what it feels like to stop, to just do the work, to let the work be the answer. The call with Gerald was on Thursday. By Friday, I was drafting the initial proposal. Diane called me 6 weeks later. She said she had been thinking about our conversation at the wedding. She was careful and polite, the way people are when they're approaching something sideways. She said she'd heard from Marcus that Gerald had mentioned working with me, and that she just wanted to say she thought it was wonderful. I thanked her. She paused, and then she said that she'd never really known what I did for work. She said it in a way that almost sounded like an apology, if you listened for it. I said something easy, something that let her off the hook, because I'm not interested in her guilt, and I don't need her admission. I said something about how we all get busy and lose track of each other's lives, and that I hoped we'd find more chances to talk. She said she'd like that. I think she meant it. I think she was surprised to find that she meant it. After we hung up, I stood by my window for a while and looked out at the Atlanta skyline, at the city I had chosen, the life I had built room by room, without asking anyone's permission or waiting for anyone's approval. I pressed the compass charm between my fingers. My aunt used to say that real confidence is the kind people feel before they understand what they're feeling. It arrives in a room first. It doesn't need to clear its throat or straighten its spine or make an announcement. It's just already there. I used to wonder if I had that. I don't wonder anymore. If there's one thing I've learned in 31 years in this career, in this family, in this life, I built quietly while other people were busy deciding what I was capable of. It's this. You don't need the people who underestimate you to eventually see you clearly. It's a nice moment when it happens, but you don't need it. You never needed it. You just need to know which way is north. And I always did.